观众朋友们好，现在是美国东部时间3月14日，这里是华尔街网报当日第4期节目。现在我们继续为您关注到的仍然是跟俄乌战争有关的最新消息。首先来看到的是来自英国《金融时报》的最新报道。根据熟悉美国外交电报的官员表示，美国已经告知盟友，中国对于俄罗斯表示有意愿提供军事援助。两位熟悉电报内容的官员说，华盛顿告诉盟国，俄罗斯要求中国提供5类设备，包括地对空导弹，还有无人机、情报设备、装甲车以及用于后勤支持的车辆。美国国务院发给欧亚盟友的电报没有具体说明北京可能向莫斯科提供任何援助的水平或者是时间，美国也没有向盟国提供支持其评估的有关情报。根据来自高级政府官员的说法，《金融时报》有关于设备清单的报道是不准确的，但是没有提供更进一步的细节。此前，《金融时报》在周日报道，俄罗斯在目前为期3周的冲突开始后的某个时间，向北京正式提出了援助请求。而根据来自 CNN 的报道，除了上述军事物资之外，俄罗斯方面还要求中国提供保质期长可以供行军使用的 MRE， 也就是速食食品。俄罗斯的请求和中国的回应引起了白宫的警惕。根据来自《金融时报》的报道，美国官员认为中国试图帮助俄罗斯，其他高级官员通过外交途径呼吁解决战争。有官员补充表示，我们看到中国基本上默许了俄罗斯的所作所为，拒绝加入制裁，指责西方和美国给予乌克兰的援助，但是事实上没有做任何事情来帮助实现和平。来自《金融时报》的报道引述美国企业研究所的安全专家塞尔斯的话说，俄罗斯的要求设备清单让人震惊，说明了莫斯科处境的绝望。他补充表示，如果北京转让清单上的任何东西给俄罗斯，我预计两党会大力推动针对中国人民解放军的制裁和出口管制。而乔治城大学的中国问题专家、前白宫亚洲事务高级顾问则表示，如果中国向俄罗斯转让武器，这将是令人深感担忧的。他特别强调，这将改变全球地缘政治的游戏规则，我们有可能回到50年代中苏联盟的时代，而乌克兰可能成为新冷战中的第一个代理人冲突。根据来自《金融时报》的报道，沙利文此前在罗马与中国最高外交政策官员杨洁篪举行了会议，美国高级官员将会议描述为紧张的7个小时，反映了此时此刻情况的严峻性。美国官员表示，会议包括关于俄罗斯和乌克兰的广泛对话。而中国官方的新华社强调，讨论的重点是如何使双边关系回到正确的轨道上。新华社总共发布了2份通报，第一份主要强调的是一个中国原则和台湾问题。北京方面强调，美国政府没有履行之前的承诺，同时又强调对于台湾主权的承认是不可接受的。在这一个通报的最后，只是提到乌克兰是杨洁篪和沙利文讨论的若干国际问题之一。而另一份报道则更加详细地讨论了中方在乌克兰问题上的有关立场，主要强调的是维护和平的重要性，以及中国方面对于乌克兰的支援。同时又表示，有关于俄罗斯和乌克兰的问题有着复杂的历史背景。根据新华社方面所通报的有关于乌克兰局势的中方立场，杨洁篪特别说，乌克兰局势走到今天这一步是中方不愿看到的。中方一贯主张尊重各国主权、领土完整，遵守联合国宪章宗旨原则。中方致力于劝和促谈，又说国际社会应该共同支持俄乌和谈尽快取得实质性成果，推动局势尽快降温。各方应该保持最大限度的克制，保护平民，防止出现大规模人道主义危机。杨洁篪还说，要理顺乌克兰问题的历史经纬来龙去脉，正本溯源，回应各方合理关切，着眼长远。同时又表示，按照安全不可分割原则，要寻求构建均衡、有效、可持续的欧洲安全机制，维护世界和平。杨洁篪特别强调，中方坚决反对任何散布不实信息、歪曲抹黑中方立场的言行，似乎所指的是美国在谈判前向各大媒体发布消息，表示中国在对俄罗斯军援问题上的立场。而说及美国方面的消息，两位消息人士表示，白宫官员现在正在讨论总统拜登在未来几周前往欧洲，与盟友讨论俄罗斯和乌克兰问题的可能性。其中有一项计划是，拜登将在3月23日在布鲁塞尔会见北约领导人，然后前往波兰。 目前，白宫方面尚未对它的具体议程进行评论。在今天结束俄罗斯在乌克兰战争的外交努力没有展示出任何进展的迹象。根据来自《纽约时报》的报道，争夺首都基辅的战斗愈演愈烈。俄罗斯的导弹摧毁了基辅的一家飞机场和公寓楼，以及西部城市罗夫诺的电视塔。周一，乌克兰谈判代表通过视频与俄罗斯谈判代表会面，当时基辅还回荡着持续的炮火声。根据来自《华尔街日报》的报道，俄罗斯和乌克兰的谈判代表在周一的会谈前其实发出了积极的信号，但是乌克兰总统泽伦斯基的顾问在周一下午说，会议已经暂停，将在周二恢复。随后，乌克兰总统办公室发言人表示，有可能在未来1至2周内就达成有关于和谈的具体条款，最晚在5月也可能达成，但同时强调乌克兰在领土方面没有让步空间。根据泽伦斯基顾问所说，谈判人员将集中精力实现停火，立即要求俄罗斯军队撤出，并为乌克兰提供安全保障。他表示，谈判此前出现了技术性暂停，之后会继续进行。现在战争已经将近3周，俄罗斯夺取了部分乌克兰南部的领土，但是在首都和其他地方推进遭到了抵抗，其部队越来越多地采用轰炸居民区和民用基础设施的方式。根据来自《华尔街日报》引述乌克兰军方的说法，在周一有弹丸向基辅居民区的9层楼房撞去，直接造成2人死亡，12人受伤。莫斯科现在也加强了导弹攻击。俄罗斯国防部在周一表示，已经开始使用精确导弹，并且摧毁了基辅安东诺夫飞机场的一个弹药库。乌克兰当局证实了袭击工厂事件，但是表示消防员控制了那里的火情，目前没有人员伤亡的有关报道。根据来自《华尔街日报》的报道，在乌克兰西部，俄罗斯的火箭弹摧毁了诺夫洛市的电视塔，造成9人死亡。广播和电视服务在傍晚时候已经恢复。美国官员警告，随着战斗从外围郊区进一步进入城市，以及俄罗斯的重型武器进入建筑物以摧毁乌克兰的抵抗，平民伤亡可能会急剧上升。而同时，美国退役上将在接受 CNBC 采访时强调，俄罗斯目前的弹药储备可能还有10天所需，超过这个时间，俄罗斯就可能面临进一步的供给困难。根据来自英国天空新闻的报道，英国国防部官员表示，有情报显示俄罗斯方面可能会制造化学生物袭击，并将此嫁祸于美国，或者宣称是乌克兰方面所进行的袭击。目前尚没有更多消息。而此前，美国方面已多次警告俄罗斯方面可能制造假旗行动，以此来嫁祸美国或者是乌克兰。
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Good to see you. Okay.
What are the consequences for China if they do aid Russia?
Well, I'm not going to get into specific consequences. I think what we have conveyed and what was conveyed by our national security advisor in this meeting is that should they provide military or other assistance that, of course, violates sanctions or supports the war effort, that there will be significant consequences. But in terms of what those specifics look like, we would coordinate with our partners and allies to make that determination.
Have you seen any, or did your colleagues see in this meeting, any sign that China got the message that they are going to heed your warnings?
Well, what we're going to be watching closely, of course, is actions. So beyond that, I think as my colleagues just read out for you in a call that we delayed the briefing slightly to make sure you could all participate in, it was an intense 7-hour session reflecting the gravity of the moment. And it was an opportunity to be very clear about what you've heard our National Security Advisor convey publicly, but more directly about what the consequences would be.
If China does not heed the U.S.'s warnings, if they do move forward with this, how concerned are you that this is inching closer to the world war that the president has been warning of?
Well, I think what we're looking at here, one is if China were to decide to be an economic provider or to take additional steps there to Russia, they only make up 15% or 15 to 20% of the world's economy. The G7 countries make up more than 50%. So there are a range of tools at our disposal in coordination with our European partners, should we need to use them. But again, we don't have anything to update you on in terms of an assessment. This is obviously an area we're watching closely. While this meeting has been planned for some time as a follow-up from the November call that the president had with President Xi. It was a timely and important moment to have this conversation, especially given the reports we've seen and the invasion, of course, of Ukraine.
Brett Renaud was killed over the weekend. One of my colleagues was injured today. We're still waiting to hear if he's okay. So what is that response going to look like?
Well, let me first say, your colleague Benjamin Hall, I know there's not final reports yet, or we would wait for your news organization to confirm those, but our thoughts, the president's thoughts, our administration's thoughts are with him, his family, and all of you at Fox News as well. In terms of specific actions, I think you have seen the president lead the world in putting in place consequences, putting in place repercussions and steps in response to the actions of Russia, the brutal actions that have certainly impacted Ukrainian people and now have certainly impacted some Americans. But in terms of next steps or what the next consequence would be, I don't have anything to preview for you at this point in time.
Is there anything you can share about the president's potential meeting, potential trip to Europe in the next couple weeks, who he might be meeting with, and really what the point would be of going to Europe?
Sure. Well, we are, of course, closely engaged with our NATO partners and European allies, as you've heard us say a number of times, about the next steps in diplomacy, whether that's providing additional humanitarian or security assistance or the mechanics for future conversations. But there's not been any final decision about a trip, so I don't have anything to preview about what that would look like if you were to take a trip. Go ahead in the back. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, and then I'll go to your...
Good afternoon. Our National Security Advisor, who's accompanied by our Assistant Secretary for the region, Dan Crittenbrink, is in Rome today, where they met with Young Deschur and his delegation from the PRC. The National Security Advisor and our delegation raised directly and very clearly our concerns about the PRC's support to Russia in the wake of the invasion and the implications that any such support would have for the PRC's relationship not only with us, but for its relationships around the world. That includes our allies and partners in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. Beyond that, I'm just not in a position to get into the details, but the purpose of this meeting, and you will hear more from the White House later today, I expect, was to convey very clearly our concerns and to discuss the implications. We have seen we are engaged. What I will say is that we are watching very closely the extent to which the PRC, or any other country for that matter, provides any form of support, whether that's material support, whether that's economic support, whether that's financial support, to Russia. Any such support from anywhere in the world would be of great concern to us. It would be of course, the greatest concern if a country like the PRC were to be doing that. A country that, by the way, has tremendous leverage with Russia, has a relationship with Russia that is distinct from the relationship that we or just about any other country on the planet has with Russia. And with that in mind, could do more than probably many other countries to bring an end to this senseless violence, to this brutality, to Putin's premeditated war of choice. You have a series of... we have communicated very clearly to Beijing that we won't stand by if we will not allow any country to compensate Russia for its losses. We've made very clear that any country that would seek to attempt to bail Russia out of this economic, financial morass will be met with consequences. We will ensure that no country is able to get away with such a thing.
Is considering accelerating its support for Ukrainian refugees with U.S. ties and particularly families that are...
I also want to take a moment to reiterate our strong recommendation to U.S. citizens living in or traveling in Russia. You should depart immediately. This has been our recommendation for 10 days now, but I would note that our travel advisory has been at level 4, do not travel, since August of 2020. We have consistently messaged for weeks to U.S. citizens in Russia about the financial issues they may face, the danger in participating in protests, and the diminishing travel options, including flight options to depart. Most recently, we sent an alert about how to find our advice and recommendations, given that Russia is drastically limiting the information space. Our embassy in Moscow has a limited ability to assist U.S. citizens because of the Russian government actions to restrict our staffing there. Since August of 2021, we have been able to provide only emergency services to U.S. citizens. For all of these reasons and more, we urge U.S. citizens to depart Russia now.
Good afternoon, everybody. What I would tell you, David, is that the Ukrainians continue to fight back very bravely and skillfully. And you've heard me use the word creatively, and I would say that that continues to be the case. They are making good use of their own knowledge, their own situational awareness, their skill sets, and certainly they're making good use of the material that they are getting, not just from the United States, but from many other nations as well. And if you just look at the map and you just look at how little progress the Russians have been able to make in the 2+ weeks now that they've been at this, yes, some of that is due to their own stumbles and missteps and logistical problems, but a lot of it is due to the Ukrainian resistance and how adaptive they are proving to be on the field and, frankly, in the street range on the Yavoriv training facility there. Our understanding is that these were cruise missiles fired from aircraft long range on the Yavoriv training facility there in western Ukraine. I can assure you that there were no U.S. military personnel there at that training facility. That's where the Florida National Guard had been doing their training before they left a few weeks ago. No U.S. contractors there, no U.S. Civilians, no U.S. government personnel there at all.
There are any efforts by the Russians to interfere with?
This is now the third significant strike in western Ukraine. It certainly appears as if the Russians are broadening their target set.
Can you hear me?
It doesn't change, I think, our general understanding that they continue to be frustrated by a very stiff Ukrainian resistance, and they are not making the kind of progress on the ground that we believe they thought they would be making by this point.
To the Polish border, as we know,
And please, let's not get focused only on a weekend strike on a training facility. Look at the damage and the death he's causing in places like Kyiv and Kharkiv and Mariupol. And, people losing their lives and their homes. He clearly has more than a message in mind here. He clearly has the occupation of Ukraine in mind. And he also clearly has diplomatic options available to him that he is obviously not proving willing to take. Now, we have heard talks about talks, and we obviously would love to see them succeed, clearly. But there hasn't been much progress in that regard. So, again, I want to be careful here that we're not reducing the kind of damage and death he's causing to some sort of message signaling. I think that's being way too generous to what the Kremlin's trying to do inside Ukraine.
Yet to the Polish border. So, what are you taking this as? Is this Putin?
We're nearly at the end of the $350 million package that the president signed over a week ago. We've got almost all of that into their hands. The remaining items should be arriving very, very soon, and then we are already at work trying to figure out what the next drawdown package of $200 million is going to look like.
To work, and he had told VOA that there were more effective.
On behalf of everybody here at the department, we'd like to extend our deepest sympathies to the family of Brent Renaud, a freelance journalist who was tragically killed over the weekend covering Ukraine. We understand that he was working on a documentary about refugees, and clearly this unprovoked war by Mr. Putin has created now more than 2.5 million refugees. So we applaud the work that he was doing the bravery with which he did it. And again, our deepest condolences and sympathies go out to his family.
Hey, John, I didn't know you called me. Sorry.